So today I'm going to talk to you guys about how you build a fun and sustainable economy. If you don't know much about me, I am a new member of the DevRel team as of February. I'm a game systems designer. I have 8 years of industry experience working on both web and mobile games. I started at Zynga working on Castleville and Farmville 2. So at their peak, they had about 8 million DAU. I worked on a Harry Potter mobile game, some casino games, and then a battle royale before finally coming here. My role here is to work with the top developers in the community, like all of you, to help improve the mechanics and the design of your game. So some of the teams that I worked on have been Adopt Me on the pet feature, as well as Bad Business on some of their monetization. So the agenda for today, I want to go over just an overview of what game economy design is, followed by what the fundamentals are that you need to build any economy for any genre of game. After that, I want to talk about player behaviors for a bit. So if you guys were at the PlayFab keynote, they sort of drove that home in that you really should be designing and thinking about how your players are playing the game and create those experiences for them. So we'll talk a bit about that once we get there. And finally, we'll put it all together. So I've put together an Excel sheet for you of an economy model that's loosely based on something I've done in the past, and I'll walk you through how I came about balancing that economy. So as an overview, what is economy design? Well, interestingly enough, if you abstract it out, it's very applicable to other sort of tasks and roles in society today. So why do I have porta potties here? Well, whenever you go to a concert, there's normally a line of bathrooms that are there. That isn't some random number that people pick out. They determine how frequently people are going to the bathroom and then determine how many they need so that there isn't a big traffic jam there during the concert. And then secondly, one thing I'm experiencing right now is planning a wedding. When you have hidden fees like cake cutting fees and corkage fees, you really need to figure out what the final price is actually going to be so that you're not living in a cardboard box once it's all said and done. So what does it look like in a game? Believe it or not, you guys have all actually done this before if you passed second grade word problems in math. So this is an example I've put together for you. So you have Kevin, who kills 10 monsters in a session. He plays 2 sessions a day. Monsters on average give 10 coins per kill. How many days will Kevin have to play in order to get the best plunger in the game, which costs 1,000 coins? So if you abstract that out into the key points that you have here, right, that there's 10 coins that drop from a monster on average, that players will, on average, for this specific cohort, as we'll talk about in a bit, kill 10 monsters, and they play 2 sessions a day. Well, that's going to give you 200 coins per day. So Kevin would have to spend 5 days grinding on these monsters to get this sword. So this is important because this informs your decisions when you're designing your game. There's a lot of very important questions that you'll be answering when you're modeling your economy. How long will my content last? This is very important because when you launch your game and you're driving your game as a service, you need to know how long that content will last before your users drop off. And if you're not able to develop new content in time before they get rid of it or before they go through all of your content, then they're just going to leave your game. And there's a good chance that they might not come back. How much effort is required to obtain something? So this is the notion of creating a rarity or desirability for items that are in your game. This is all dictated when you're modeling out your economy. How is your content paced properly, right? So is it too simple or too easy to grind through your entire game? Is it too hard? Do they hit a wall? Because if they do, that creates a negative experience that could cause drop-off. So now we're going to go into the fundamentals that you'll need in order to design a game economy. And the first and the most important aspect of it is actually time. Time is used to estimate the total progress that your player is making in your game. It's used to estimate the value of resources. So whenever you see that something costs 100 coins, it's actually tied back to the time or the effort that your player needs to put into getting that item. And it's measured in several forms. So I've listed a few before, but to go through them, you have session length. So how long from the time that they log into your game to the time that they leave are they playing your game? Or how long does a task take? When you're balancing combat in the game, you're actually thinking about what the combat length is rather than what big bursty numbers are coming. Because that is actually the experience that's created for players. How many days are they playing a week? And therefore, is your content too easy or too hard for this frequency of play? There are actually mechanics that are tied to time as well, right? So you have timers, and these are good retention mechanics. So if you've ever played, let's say, Adopt Me, and you come in and there's a daily collection, well, that's a way to get players to come in every single day just to make sure that they get the most bang for their buck whenever they're playing the game. You can also use time to drive limited time content, so egg hunt content or Christmas content. When you have something and you're telling players that there's a limited amount of time to get it, that really drives their behavior towards completing that content in your game. So the time is the cornerstone of any great economy. All of the essential questions that you're asking ultimately are tied back to time, right? So how long should a player be spending killing this monster before an item drops? Or how long will it take for a player to purchase all of the furniture and expansion? These are the critical questions that you should always be asking when you're designing a game economy. Next, and also equally important, you have currencies. So we generally break these down into two, maybe three categories. The first is your soft currency, which are currencies that you earn in-game, selling items or defeating monsters. The second is hard currencies. These are ones that are purchased for premium currency. Most commonly, that would be Robux in your game. And the third are third currencies. So these are a bit more complicated, but they're usually for systems that you don't want to compete with your soft currency in your game. So for soft currency, these are always earned through in-game actions. You complete tasks, or you defeat enemies, or you sell items to earn this currency. And they're used for most of your in-game transactions. They're also the primary unit that's used to gate player progression. So in order for Z-Kevin to get that 1,000 coin plunger, he has to earn that currency, right? And so he can't obtain that item until he gets enough currency to do so. And it's often represented fictionally as something very simplistic like gold or dollars. The reason that you want to do this and you don't really want to invent your own currency for your soft currency is that it's a very simple thing for your players to learn. And while they have a lot of complicated mechanics in your game to learn, this is one that's familiar to them, that's easy for them to understand. And the second reason that you want to pick a very basic sort of fictional front for your soft currency is for hard currencies, which you really want to project as something that's special or valuable in your game. So hard currencies are premium currency that's used for maybe some of the cosmetics or more valuable items in your game. You purchase them with real money, and they can be either Robux or your own hard currency. And we'll go into the pros and cons for each of those in a minute. So they're often represented as something that's fictionally valuable. So most commonly you see gems or diamonds or something like that, but you can really tie it to whatever the fiction is of your game. So the question becomes, do I use Robux or do I use hard currency? I'm going to go through some of the pros and cons for each of these. For Robux, the pros are that there's a lot less click friction. So if you guys went to Jeff Maher's talk earlier today, he talked about the funnel, right? And when we talk about a click friction, every time that you have to add an extra click into doing the action, there's a much more likely chance that there's a drop-off. Think about in your own life. If you've ever gone to Amazon and you went to go and impulse buy something, and maybe there was a bit too many clicks or too much data that you had to put in, that gives you enough time to think, do I really need this item? And then you leave. So when we're designing sort of a funnel for purchases, we want there to be as little friction as possible. The other pro to Robux is that the value is easily understood, right? It's across all of the games on Roblox unless those games are doing their own hard currency. So players know what that value is and they can sort of evaluate how valuable the items are that you're selling. And there's also a less reliance on implementing a successful purchase flow. So the biggest problem with your own hard currencies is that if you don't implement it correctly, it will hurt your monetization. For the cons, you have the inability to give some out in-game daily. So this is a very valuable tactic that we use in game design where we give a daily drip of this hard currency. And the reason we do this is multiple reasons. The first is that for our non-payers, they still have the ability to buy some of those awesome items that you have in your game. And I can't emphasize enough how good that is for retention and engagement, and also for monetization, because sometimes what you'll see is if they've earned enough that they're somewhat close to making that purchase, they might purchase the difference. And getting a player to convert is always super valuable and always makes them much more likely to spend money later on in your game. And so the second con is that the value is easily understood by players. So I listed this as both a pro and a con. And the reason it could be a con is that a lot of players are very conservative with their Robux. If they don't think that your item is valuable enough based off of the Robux that they have left, they won't make that purchase. So then, the pros and the cons of your own hard currency. Well, you have the ability, as I said, to grant it to your users in-game. So the ways that you would do this, and you want to do it very sparingly, are usually like a daily drip that are given to players, or if they hit a certain level milestone, say they hit level 10 in your game, and that's a big deal, then you grant them a little bit of that. You also have the ability to run your own sales on that hard currency. And while you want to use those sparingly, because you don't want to teach your users to only wait for sales to make purchases, that does drive some monetization for your game. For the cons, there's just naturally going to be some extra friction to purchasing this hard currency. If a user doesn't have Robux, they first have to go and purchase Robux, then they have to go back to your game, then they have to purchase your hard currency, and then they have to purchase the item that they want. That's just a lot of steps to get to. But if you implement it in a seamless way, it can actually improve your conversion, as I was talking about. So the third currency that we have is called third currencies. And they're often used for one-off features. So they're useful for when you don't want a feature to compete with your main progression of your game. Think about maybe crafting systems that you see in some games where you don't really want that to take away from the gold or the soft currency progression that you have for the other systems in your game. You do this so that it paces that piece of content by its own set amount of time that you want without competing with the rest of your game. And typically for third currencies, there's a lot of variance in what fictionally you want it to be. I would say skin it as whatever the system is. So here I have scrap parts, so if you're putting together scrap metal for a new gun, or maybe there's some magic rocks that you're putting together for a new spell, you should really tie it to that system. That way when the player sees it in the game, they immediately associate it with that system. So I want to advise you to use third currency sparingly. There's a lot of complexity that ends up getting added to the game, and if you add too many currencies to your game, your players are going to get confused as to which system that it's in, and then there will be sources of frustration for those players. It may also create bloats in your economy. If you're not really providing enough sinks, as we'll talk about in a minute, for that currency over time, or you're not supporting that system over time, then players are going to stockpile that currency, and then all the content will be too easy for those players. And a lot of the problems that you might end up trying to solve with third currencies can very easily be solved with soft currency. So I would advise strongly against using third currencies too much in your games. So the next fundamental part that you need for any game economy are called sources and sinks. And they do exactly what they sound like they do. So your currency sources create that currency for players. So these are, for soft currencies, when you're selling an item in the store, that gives you coins. Or when you're opening up a chest, that'll give you coins. For hard currencies, that's typically either daily rewards, as I was mentioning, or straight up purchasing it from the store. For your sinks, it's the exact opposite. It's systems in your game that are removing that currency from the game. So for soft currencies, that's often when you're purchasing an item in a shop, or you're upgrading a character, or in maybe a more advanced game like a World of Warcraft when they have a tax on your auction house items whenever you sell something. For your hard currencies, it's also just purchasing those premium items in your game, purchasing soft currency packages, or purchasing game passes if you are just sticking to Robux. So next I want to talk about understanding player behaviors, because this is kind of the backbone to how you're modeling your economy. You want to be thinking about how your users are interacting with your system. And so you always want to be asking, how are the players going to be playing my game? What is the player motivation? Are they all about completing content or unlocking all of the achievements of the game? Are they really into the competitive aspect of PvP? Are they really just into the social aspect and they're really just looking for ways to express themselves in your game? And then you also have to consider player skill, because player skill is going to be highly determinant of how quickly they get through your content. There's also game platform. So a lot of talks today have been talking about the difference between PC and mobile. I would emphasize that you also build your games for mobile in addition to PC, just because there is a lot of players that are trending towards mobile currently. And also, what is their play frequency? Are they playing 7 days a week? Are they playing 2 days a week? You want to be able to design your content, that way it's accessible to everybody, no matter how much time they're playing your game. So, to circle back to platform considerations, your players are going to behave generally differently on each of the platforms. So PC are typically your more hardcore users, and they're going to play longer sessions. Typically what I've found on any platform is somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes on average that they're going to be playing that game on PC. They can handle more complicated controls, so that covers other aspects of design. And they're typically an older audience. For your phone and tablet, they're going to play much shorter sessions. Think about any commute to work or to school where they're playing on a bus for maybe 5 minutes and then they close their phone and they go about their day. They need more simplified controls, and they're typically a more younger audience. So then the next aspect of your players are what I would call your player cohorts, and I sort of group them into 4 general groups, but you could break them out into a larger spectrum. So your casual players are often the ones that only play for the social or the role play experiences. And while your economy should be accessible to them, it shouldn't be tuned towards them. Typically, they're going to be playing your game in a way that you don't generally design it to be, just because they're there for that social experience, which is very big on Roblox. You have your average player who are looking for both the social experience and the achievement aspect of your game. And while your economy should be accessible to them, and it should be difficult, but still obtainable. Then you have your highly engaged, right? So these are your players that play pretty much only for achievement or content completion. They're also the ones that are tweeting at you angrily daily. And you want to generally balance your economy for this group. And we'll talk about why in a minute. And then the last group that I should mention are your whales. And these are the ones that comprise the majority of the spend in your game. And no matter how you design your economy, they're going to crush it because they are the ones that are playing 7 days a week, 10 times a day. They're absolutely crazy. They will get to your end game first before anybody else. And so you should make your economy accessible to them, but never, ever balance your economy for this group. And we'll talk about why. So think about your player preference on this theoretical line from easy to hard. And if we had 10 players that were plotting what their preference is for how difficult your economy will be, it'll actually end up looking like a bell curve, where the majority will actually be in the middle here and saying that they want, somewhat of a challenging experience, but not too hard or not too easy. So one thing I've asked a lot of developers as I've been working with them in the accelerator group or in my deep dive program that I do is, how did you come about the numbers in your game? And the number one response that I got, and actually the only response, was they just picked some numbers and they yeeted it into their game, and that's about it, right? When you're doing that, you're basically guessing where on this imaginary line your content is going to be. And so if you're more of an emotional designer, you may end up making it too easy. And what you'll do is you'll lose out on the maximum amount of players, right? So for this example, right, I've balanced this economy for these 2 players. And it might be accessible to the 4 players over here and the 1 player over here, but I'm not actually optimizing my economy. Likewise, as I was just saying, when you're balancing for a whale, it's very inaccessible to the rest of your player base. It's way too hard. They don't feel like they're making any progress. And what you'll actually find is, as a developer, if you're just sort of getting a feel for what you like in your game because you are playing your game a ton and you're a more advanced user, you're actually ending up balancing your economy to be way too hard for the average player that's going to be playing your game. So you want to find a balance, right? But actually, what I typically try to do, as I had said, is I try to balance it for more the P60 or the P75 user. I don't know if I talked about this, but when I say a P60 user, think about that your player base is about 100 players. And the P60 user is actually the 60th user in that group. So it's not 60% of your users or 40% of your users. It's that 60th player. So I want to balance it towards that player and that behavior. And the reason I want to make it slightly harder is because it's more accessible to the players that I know are going to be sticking around in the game. So this one user all the way on the easy end of the spectrum, they're typically not too engaged anyway. And if you really want to hit the most users possible, you want to make it slightly harder for the majority, but you want to make it accessible. And then the other benefit to that is when you're playtesting or when your players are playing, if it's too difficult, you can always tune it back, and that's a much better experience than if you have to make it harder. So now let's put it all together. And I've put together an Excel for you today of a very basic example of what an economy document would look like. So there's a few steps that you need to take for designing any economy that's out there. First, you need to research similar games that are out there that are inspiring to you in the game that you're making. Secondly, you want to write down your goals and assumptions. Then you want to build your economy, and then you want to play test the crap out of it. And then finally, you can improve it with game analytics, as Jeff covered in his talk earlier today. So to dive into each of those, how do you research similar games? So for me, whenever I'm working on a project and I'm working on a game in a certain genre, I want to look at similar games that are popular, and I want to play through them several times to see what I can improve upon. I want to deconstruct their game economy. So on these games that I'm playing, typically what I'll do is every time that I reach a level, I'll write down what it required to get there. I killed 5 monsters, and now I have 100 coins in my wallet, etc. And I'll do this for the first few levels just to get an understanding of what the pacing of that game is. And then next, I'll read articles and wikis on those games. So the process that I had just talked about where I'm recording those milestones, somebody crazier than you has already done that out there, and you can get that information for what their level curves and their experience per level is. And that's super valuable when you're trying to get a general idea for what you want in your game. Next, you want to write down your goals and assumptions. So your goals are plans for what you want your economy to accomplish. So this could be how long you want your content to last before you have to release another piece of content for your game. Or what do you want the depth of spend to be in your game? Or what do you want the difficulty to be? And then as you're working on your economy, you want to write down your assumptions. So these are any aspects of your economy that aren't 100% accurate. So models are typically used to inform your decisions, but they're not a perfect science. And that's why you have to play test them afterwards. And so these assumptions will help inform you of maybe some of the blind spots that you have in your game, such as maybe the player frequency or what you assume is going to be the drop rate on a random item. Next, you want to build your economy. And this is sort of broken down into three aspects. First, you want to model your player income. Secondly, the duration of your content. And then third, you want to model your sinks. So what I put together for you today is a very simple example economy. Let's picture that we're playing a life simulation game where you can build your own house, you can go to work every day, and you can live a daily life. Think about maybe a Bloxburg or an Adopt Me style game. So the first aspect, as I was talking about, and just to walk you through this is sort of the overview of my economy. The reason why I build this page when I'm doing an economy is both for me to organize all of the details of my economy and see a high level what my economy looks like. And secondly, so it's accessible to the other people on my team so that they can go in and they can see exactly how things are working in my economy. And here you can see I've written down my assumptions already, right? So we can go over those assumptions in a bit, but I've also modeled the rest of my economy. So the first step when you're modeling your economy is you want to tally up your sources that you have in your game. So here I've written down a few. My player can sleep and they earn some money. They can shower, they can eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They can go to work and they can relax. And this will all earn them currency within a 10-minute period of my in-game day. So I've tallied that up. I've written down the 10-minute duration and I've written down my total income. So now I can calculate my player's income. The next step is that you get your player profiles. And while I can't give you actual data from Roblox, these are generally numbers that I've seen for the play frequencies in the different cohorts that I've found. So here, I've written down all of the different cohorts that I covered previously, right? I have my casual player on PC, as well as mobile. I have my more hardcore user, the P60, and I have my whales. And I also have some core details that I need in order to model my economy. So that's the session length, right? How long are they playing between when they log in and when they log out? How many sessions are they playing a day, and how many days they're playing a week? And then from there, it's like that simple word problem that I showed you before. So I have my session length, my sessions per day, my days per week for this user that I'm modeling my economy after, which I chose for this as the P60 on PC, because those stats actually fall in line with my P75 on mobile. So I'm going to find the sweet spot between the two on the different platforms. Again, I'm always thinking about my players across platforms and how they're going to enjoy my game. Now I can model their income. And another thing that's important to note is I always add some sort of efficiency score to my economy. The reason I do this is because not every player is going to play your game completely perfectly every single time they play. Think about some of the games that you've played where maybe you put a pizza in the oven and midway through you had to get up and you had to go get it before you could continue. They're not going to hit all of the beats that you fully expect in an economy, and so you want to sort of scale it back just to make it slightly easier for that group. And now it's just that simple math. So I've tallied that it's 630 coins that they earn in a real-life day in my game. The next step that I want to do is I want to model the content duration. So this is a very short and simple step. For me in the past, it was a business move of leads coming to me and saying, our content needs to last for 3 months, so make it work. And so I've put here 90 days, and that's how long my content needs to last. So because I've modeled my player's daily income, it's simply 90 times the 630 for my total income over this 90-day period. And now we're ready for the last step, which is modeling your sinks. So based on the systems that you've put in your game that players can spend their currency on, now you just allocate that money to that. So you can see over here, I have my model for my sinks, and I have the total amount that I need to sink, and I'm distributing them across these different systems. So you might be thinking, how did I choose the ratio? Well, that's more of a feeling thing for the designers. For me, I wanted the bulk of the spend to be in the housing system because I feel like that's highly aspirational and that's what players are going to drive towards and that's what they're going to spend the most money on. But when they spend that money or they finally get that money, it's a large and rewarding experience for them. So weirdly, even though this is highly mathematical and Excel and nerdy, you're still creating experiences in here through the numbers. So now I've gone through and I've priced all of my items in here. So you can see for the houses, I priced them based on the value of them, where a townhouse is the worst one and the mansion is the best one. I've priced my cars, which is sort of the middle of the road, and then I've priced my home items, which I want to be pretty cheap for my players because I want them to be able to customize their house often, even as I'm rolling out new content. And as you can see, once you've done that, then you have a perfectly balanced economy. So here is the amount of income that is sourced, and I've sunk it all in my systems. And that, at its core, no matter what your game is the simple process that you're going to be doing to model your game economy. So once you've modeled your economy, now you're ready to play test your game. And you should be playing your game as each of your cohorts. You know how long their sessions are, and you know how many times they're playing a day. So you can sit down with a pen and paper, and you can record the milestones as you're playing to see if it matches up with your game economy. The second part of this is that you can get a feel for what that experience is. If you feel like the content is just impossible to do as a P30 user, a casual user, then you can scale it back a bit, right? Or if you feel like it's just too easy for everybody, then you can scale it up a bit. Like I said, models aren't a perfect science, so don't be afraid to get some sort of opinion in there of what that experience is that you're crafting. And then next, you want to be having your friends, your development team, anybody that you can get to play test your game. I always tell the accelerators, play test early and often, get as much feedback as you can. Sit there, observe them playing, see if they're playing the game as you anticipated that they did, right? I showed you in my economy that the bulk of my spend was in houses. Maybe you're seeing a bunch of people playing your game and they're not buying on houses at all. Maybe they're investing way more in another system, and maybe you need to allocate more currency to that. So it's really important that you see how your players are playing and you adjust on the fly. Next, once you go live, now you can inform your decisions with game analytics. It's so powerful that it's almost like you're cheating, right? So instead of guessing that their session length is 15 minutes, now you can actually see what that player is in your game. Because depending on your genre, there's going to be different user behaviors. And so it's really important once your game goes live that you're monitoring what your players are doing and you're delivering the content that they want. And that, in its essence, is how you design a game economy.